you want an introduction?
No. I mean, I can introduce myself. I didn't know you were like introducing this whole thing.
We're not, we'll add it later.
And we'll do it several times as people cycle in.
Yeah, so, we're just happy
I'm just
you're
thinking
here.
about the production value.
Oh, don't worry about it, don't worry about it.
You know me.
I know you.
It's post-production, editing, that's what we'll do.
Hey, as long as someone has that figured out.
So introduce yourself.
Well, hello. I'm the first one to go. My name is William Hafer. My parents, Karen and Harry Hafer, have been longtime members of the church, and I grew up here. Going to this church pretty much every Sunday up until about the time I went to college, and church didn't become that important. Schooling and studying became more important. Wink, wink. So I have some memories that I jotted down here on my phone. So if I look down and nod at you all, my apologies. But, some of my first memories. Well, first off, this church growing up was always something that I looked forward to coming to church growing up. I had friends here, a large group of children my age. We all liked each other. We all played outside. We all hung out. We all had games we'd play. And then also just many of the adults. You know, like Mark's back here, his son and daughter. I grew up with his daughter, Kat, and many other adults. It was almost like an extended family, which was always wonderful. I learned many different things from many adults. It was, you know, in those days, everyone kind of helped parent the children that were running around causing trouble and telling them to stop, instead of parents worrying, don't tell my child what to do kind of syndrome. There was a lot of us learning from other members of the church on how to be appropriate citizens and humans, and how to treat people with kindness and respect, which was always great. And I have fond memories of that. So I'll just kind of go down my list here. When I was 6 and a half, about 7, we used the playground area was much different back in the late 80s, early 90s. The idea of safety wasn't necessarily high on the church's list. It was more of a, you know, if a kid hurts themselves, they'll learn, other than trying to have a lawsuit. So there was this awesome zip line, at least for me, for us kids, it was an awesome zip line. You had to climb up on this rickety wooden wire spool to even get to the thing, you know, rusted wire, about 30 feet long. It was a yellow, you know, old yellow two-handled zip line you'd have to hold on to dear life to, you know, go down back and forth, and it had a string on it a rope on it that you'd drag back, and you'd take turns. And I actually, I've never broken a bone except for there on that zip line. I fell way too young to be on this thing to begin with. Mom and Dad are inside talking. All the kids, not a soul was watching us. Late 80s. And fell, hairline fracture in my left wrist. But man, I couldn't wait to get back on that thing. That was an awesome thing that I was sad to see go when it ended up being taken away due to safety concerns. Another great memory I have of growing up here was Margaret, our old secretary. She was an awesome soul and an amazing human being. She was so kind to us kids. She was so patient with us. She always had a jar of Hershey's Kisses on her desk. And the rule was you had to tell her what you learned that day, what you talked about, and if you were good. That was really the main concern, because some of us sometimes were not very good, and she would find out, and you would not get a Hershey's Kiss the next time. So after you told her your story, you'd get a Hershey's Kiss and a smile from her, and yeah, I have fond memories of her. She was always super kind to all of us. And
Was that Margaret Seymour?
Margaret Seymour, yep. She was kind of like the bookkeeper and the memory keeper of this church, kind of the matriarch, I would almost call her, of the church. You didn't mess with Margaret, but you didn't really need to, because she could just give you a look. But she was always so sweet. She had a really great smile. Charles was an awesome minister. I always loved Charles. I loved coming to church and being able to. Charles was the type of person that you know, a little kid would start chatting him up, and he would take the time to talk to that child. And you know, not everybody who's ministered here used to do that, and that's what I always loved about. He'd sit down. He'd sit right here and tell a story to the kids just about every Sunday. And I remember playing my trombone for his birthday. Played "Take Me Out to the Ball Game" and "Happy Birthday" for him on one of his birthdays. Gave him a baseball cap with little red socks my mom made for him. And that was always fun. He was such a great guy. We actually spent time up in his cabin in Maine for a weekend when we visited them. And his granddaughter and grandson are good friends of mine even to this day. So it's always he was a really awesome person. And he married my parents, which is pretty cool. Speaking of marriage, my folks got married here. My sister, who we'll be talking later, got married, or her reception was here. And my wife and my reception was here. So the whole Hafer clan can thank the church for bonding them together in matrimony. One of the cool things about growing up here was the youth services. The RGL work with the kids was really awesome. And growing up through the different classes, and that also helped the volunteers, the adult volunteers were fantastic, taking the time and helping us grow as humans and people, and learning more about the church and learning how to be productive adults who were kind and generous to people of all creeds and nations and beliefs and everything. One of the fun things I remember is at being in junior high school and high school, we would have youth services. I don't know if they still do those. I think they do, kind of, but we did one every year, and it was always super fun. We always had people seem to enjoy them, and it gave us an opportunity to speak our minds as a younger generation, which I think is very important in a growing community, which I hope that the church does that still, or will. And then one last thing that I'll say to kind of close things off is, as I walked in, I saw the beautiful tree in that pot outside, and I'm pretty sure is that the same one that's been here forever? That used to sit up here? Yeah, I just think that's really cool. And I remember seeing that tree and always wondering how the heck it survived inside. But it survived, and so does this church, and I find that awesome. So thank you, everyone.
Third generation,
Yeah, oh my gosh, a grown-up.
Well, fourth,
Success.
grandparents, they were UUs in Colorado, so.
So Denise, you wanna go? I'll watch the clock, because I think, thank you.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, thank you. I love it. So I'll watch the clock, and if I give you this sign, just wrap it up.
That's great.
So just introduce yourself, I think we can just go on.
Hi, my name is Denise Dickinson, and I'm a second-generation Unitarian. Charles married every single one of my family members and me twice, except for my parents, who were married during World War II in, North Carolina, I think. So, speaking of Charles marrying people, My parents got remarried after they'd been divorced for 10 years. And it was really something. We had invited some people. Mom made a carrot cake in a sheet pan. I think she also made some wassail, kind of spiced it. Wonderful thing. And so the day before or early in the day of the wedding, Charles said, maybe you should cut that carrot cake in smaller pieces. And maybe we could get some more of that wassail. What we didn't know was he'd invited longtime old friends from Omaha, people Mom was in theater with, and she was on the radio during World War II. Those people were here as well. And Sneaky Charles was one of the best things he could do for our family. He didn't marry poor Mom and Dad in the first place, but he married him in the second place. It was really wonderful. My brother and sister were there. I was there, my then husband. It was amazing. It was amazing. So that one stuck. I've been married 3 times and none of them did. But growing up here gave me advantages. But I used to question everything. And I learned that here, question it if it seems odd. So that was me.
Anything else?
I remember the church school in the old building with the low-hanging pipes. You had to make sure you didn't hit your head. And I was in in kindergarten with Mike and Andy Hall. And they were fraternal twins, but at that time they just looked alike. So their mom would kiss one of them on the cheek and leave lipsticks, and that's how we told the difference. So anyway, I'm still here.
Good, well, thank you. Thank you. Irvis and Sheila, you want to come on up? Well, it's still light outside, so you can get home safely. Denise, what year was that remarriage?
Okay,
You told me it was 86.
and that's correct. I married in 86, the day after Christmas.
Wow.
That's really something.
Is it on now? Yeah. Can you hear me? Yep. Okay. I thought to begin with, talk a little bit about the Layman's League that we had at the old church. The Layman's League that we had at the old church, this was a dinner group, and with a formal dinner, and we had it once a month, and normally we had anywhere from 25 to 45, and I know one time when Ted Sorensen was the speaker that they had around 60, and we had a kitchen group that had to prepare the meal and so on like that, and then we also had a group from that era that did the cleanup after the dinner. The one office that had to be almost selected, and a special person was the secretary treasurer. And when you came to the meeting and had the last minutes, or the minutes of the last meeting, he would get up and give the talk. And basically, it had nothing to do with anything that went on from the meeting before. This was just his opportunity to say went on with Unitarianism and whatever he wanted to say during that last month's time. The group, regular, we had about 10 to 12 faculty members from Wesleyan and the university, and we had 6 or so regular members that came from the Lincoln Air Force Base, and then the rest of it were just regular members that we were here. The things that brought them, I think, in was we had Hall, who was, I think, chairman of the economics department at the university, gave the book review on the Affluent Society by John Kenneth Galbraith, and that, of course, brought in about 50 to 60 people. We had, during political years, we would have a special meeting that for the state politicians that were running for office, and this could come in, and one of the rules we had, once the door was closed, you could say anything you needed to say, but once the doors were open, anything you said or brought it to it, or if any newspaper people were there, it could be denied. And we felt that we could get more, quote, truth and what was really going on by having a rule like that. And it seemed to work quite well. The politicians, I know, in one of the evenings that we had a political meeting, the was really fairly noisy and going on, and Harvey Warner, who was a professor on the Ag campus, was a really reserved person, but everybody was talking to the different ones and walking around and talking to them. All of a sudden, it was just dead silence, and we could hear some noise over there. We looked, and Harvey had got really upset with the lieutenant governor, and he was on a little stool about 6 inches high, and he was shaking his finger at his nose and really reading the riot act, because this guy had proposed that they cut down on the budget on the Ag College because they felt that would save the state of Nebraska a lot of money. And of course, this really burnt Harvey, and he was giving them talk. And of course, after we saw what was happening going on, people went over and tried to soothe things down a little bit. But it was really kind of a shock, because you had all this ruckus and all of a sudden just dead silence, except for 2 people talking, and that type of activity. In the cooking groups that we had, they had to make up the menu and had to do all of this. As I said, the time I know I was head of the cooking group for when Ted Sorensen was here, and we had reservations for 60 people. And you can imagine that was pretty big calling for the space in that we had. But obviously, most of these were really quite well attended, and it's one of the things I really miss from present day talk. In addition, in '66, I was president of the church, and I asked Harvey Warner, who had been a former president, what any special things that gave him trouble or anything like that, and talked. He says, I had one, but he said, you won't have this. He was explaining that the minister, I believe it is Reverend Dumas, if that's the correct pronunciation, was abusive to both his daughter and his wife, and at church. And several people had talked to him about it, and they had mentioned it to him, and finally the board had decided that they just couldn't take it anymore, and he was to give them a notice. And so he said the Sunday before that I was to give him notice, he said, I just couldn't sleep all Saturday night. He said, I must have got up at 1 o'clock, and he says, I fixed a pot of coffee and had some coffee in that, and he says, about 5 o'clock, I heard the paper hit the porch. And so he said, I went out, got the paper, poured myself another cup of coffee, sat down, opened up the paper, and here I noticed that the Journal-Star had given this minister Man of the Year for the city of Lincoln on the day he was going to get canned from our church. But they did have more trouble than me. They couldn't even get him out of the housing facilities and so on. I think they had to guarantee him a place to live for the following year and so on, or up to the end of the year and so on. But that was one of the strange that he was right. I'd never had anything to do with that. In the groups that we had before, in speaking, we had, as it said, we had them from the Air Force Base, and once in a while we would get somebody there to talk and tell what's going on in the city and what they felt about the Air Force and how things were going. But one of the more interesting areas that we had was we had several young priests came down to one of the meetings to give the talk, and of course it was closed doors and so on like this, and they were talking about all the problems that they were having up there in Omaha in the Catholic diocese, and a few people had heard about it a little bit, but nothing more was done, and I think most of this didn't come out in the papers until 3 or 4 years later, but they were really quite upset, and they spent the whole evening giving their rendition of what was going on in the Catholic Diocese of Omaha. I started coming to the church probably around 53, 54. I'm not too sure the exact time. I had been a former Methodist, and one of my colleagues, I was working at the time in circulation for the Journal-Star, and one of my colleagues said, "Hey, you ought to go to the Unitarian Church." He says, "This is really interesting." He said, I know you're interested in religion and so on, and this guy is a fairly provocative talker, and he says, but one thing he does, he says, he apologizes every time he reads out of the Bible. So that was one of his sales pitches. But when I started then coming to the church, they were hurting for teachers, particularly for the junior high group and so on. And so they asked me to, since I had a fairly good background in philosophy, religion, and so on, they asked me if I'd be an instructor there for that group. And it was really an interesting time, and it was interesting, but the only problem was it happened at the same time that the minister was giving the sermon. And so here, what I came for, and originally I didn't get to do. And I think I was probably an instructor there for, 2 or 3 years. And finally I decided that I was really missing out on too much of the other, and we'll let somebody else have a chance with those people. And my wife and I were both, I don't know if she's going to talk about it or not. We'll let her do that. But we got married here.
Now, all of those meals were at 12th and H, is that right?
We had some, a few years, the early part of this, when this church was open. I think the time with Sorensen, Ted Sorensen was here, I think that was in this church. We wouldn't have had enough room, I know, for space, and it was that great.
You really enjoy the men's group now,
Yeah.
but your cooking, you did at the 12th and H church, or did you cook here too?
We cooked there too, oh yeah.
Okay.
Sheila, can you tell us about?
Yeah, I'll tell you.
Hold your mic by the chin. Hold your mic by the chin. Let me-
Under your chin.
I didn't join the church. Orvis and I have known each other, dated several years. And then we were married in 1966 here. And Charles provided, did the wedding, or did the ceremonies. Anyway, as the years went by, we I think the one thing I am talking about is the moms group. And our children were born in the 70s. And so we had a moms group here, of which Karen was a member, And I really enjoyed that. We brought the children with us, we had a program, we usually had a snack, and it was a good morning out. And we had adopted our children, we were married in '66, but our son was born in '71, our daughter in '73, and I don't remember coming when they were infants, but when they were about 3 and 5, I started coming to the moms group and really enjoyed it, because we would present different programs. I remember myself arranging a program with the man that was on, there was a man on KFOR around Christmas time, and I don't remember the name and I don't remember what he was talking about, but that was one of the programs I arranged. And one thing about the program, or about the group, was that the children grew, and so we would share clothes with each other, which was always helpful, and money saving. And I don't know how long the group kept on. When I started, our children are adopted, and I'd always had been working before, and when we adopted our children, or my first child, I had to quit working. The agency was one of the requirements of the agency. And I think they changed it 3 or 4 years later. They decided that all of their workers were working mothers. They shouldn't be asking their adoptive mothers to quit working. But I think that's the end of my story.
That's a great story. Thank you. Thank you. That's interesting that there are other people here in this room that participated with you. I love that idea of exchanging clothes. Where could you do that? Where was the space to do that?
Oh, we did it in here, or in the other room behind.
Yeah.
We just brought the things, when our child outgrew them, we just brought them, and and I don't know where we kept them. Maybe we just kept them at each other's houses. But yeah.
What a great idea.
Especially the infant clothes, the early clothes, they go
Yeah.
through so fast.
That's so great. Well, thank you so much.
I've got one question.
Oh, yeah.
Inquiring minds want to know, what is going on in Omaha in the Catholic diocese?
The problem that they had was the bishop was rather an autocrat, and he had rules, and his rules, whether they went with the church or not, they were his rules, and he said they're church rules, and so everything was metered out by him, all the rules of their activities, what they did, what they were in charge of, and so on like that. That there was no flexibility, and I know at that time, we also had some people who went to the Catholic Church, but they also came here, and they were upset with the Omaha group, and so when they got more upset, then they were making more attendance here at our Sundays than instead of going up there. But that was part of their complaint, was that this bishop was pretty much of a hard-nosed autocrat, and everything had to go according to his plans, and no one else got to say anything in him.
Just him and God. Thanks again so much.
Okay.
We're gonna get Roger in, because he rode his bike, and he needs to get home before it gets dark.
Thank you, Orvis.
Yeah. Thank you, that was just perfect. 1955 or 56, wow. That's a lot of getting up and down out of these chairs. Yeah, it was a flat. So Roger, will you make sure you introduce yourself?
I sure will.
I'll watch the clock, I'll give you
Okay, yeah. I'm Roger Day, and I feel like I'm going to be singing to the choir. I know all of you pretty much, I think. So I'm just going to talk about my relationship to the church, which goes back. Oh, thank you. Okay. It goes back to my dad's older sister was a social worker, and she worked at Hull House in Chicago, which of course was a Unitarian initiated, they called them settlement houses back in the day. And she also went to Germany after the war to help with the tragedy of the German people and married a German. Anyway, she was quite a Unitarian and my favorite aunt. When my dad came back from the war, he came to the church on H Street, and I don't know which minister it was, but he talks about the sermon he heard, which was as Mozart still composing ever more beautiful sonatas, is Schiller writing ever more persuasive, beautiful prose, and he says, well, that's, and the minister says, well, I don't know what they're doing now. And my dad liked the idea that Unitarians didn't pretend to know. And he joined the church, I can't remember whether it was 47 or 49, but he joined the church. And my mom, the family had always been Church of Christ, First Plymouth Church. My parents were married there and so forth. So, but my mom, in order to have some family unity, joined the church here, and the family remained at this church until they split. My sister wanted to go to a Christian church and went back to First Plymouth, and my mom went with her. So there was a period of time when we were a split church, but as you know, Reverend Young at First Plymouth and Charles did a book review together on the
NPR.
It wasn't NPR. It was the I can't even remember. But in any case, I remember Reverend Young joking that Unitarians were just wayward Congregationalists, which is true historically, actually. Anyway, my relationship to this church, I remember the same thing as Denise talked about, the basement of the old church, but I came to the groundbreaking for this church on a windy March morning, I think it probably was. There was nothing out here but Veterans Hospital you could see, and so that was a memory. And I think Harry found a picture that actually had me turning a spade or something like that. Is that true?
Yeah, I didn't know it was you in it. I just looked through, it might be out there on the wall.
No, I looked for the one that you found earlier. But anyway, so I did my years in the Unitarian church group, and until, as Topher likes to say, sex, drugs, and rock and roll took me the other way when I was 15 or whatever. But I remember very distinctly the experiences we had in church school. There was a year, I think it was possibly our 6th grade year, we went and visited pretty much every other denomination in town to learn what other churches were doing. We had, in another year, we had a paleontologist took us down to Louisville, Nebraska to look in the quarries for old fossils of crinoids and that kind of stuff. And in the summer of 67, there was a love-in at Pinewood Bowl, and the church representatives agreed that we could take a field trip, and so the 6th grade group went to the love-in at Pinewood Bowl And some, I remember very distinctly, some long-haired said, "What's this, the nursery school section?" And our clever leader said, "Oh, you guys are just full of love, aren't you?" So anyway, I finally came back after my first child was born, and talking about Mom's group, Karen and various of the people here, we formed a parents group, and I think it's a sign of advancement that it was not moms, it was parents by the time we got there. Yeah, it was mom and pop, and that group did a lot of interesting and I think some good things for the group. I'm going to end with one thing. I'm a Unitarian, born and bred, and right to the heart. You know, one of the proudest moments I ever had, I was in Washington, D.C. I worked for the Department of Labor and went back there often, and I'd run the Oval, and when the Holocaust Museum was new, I got a chance to go to the Holocaust Museum, and I ran down there and got in line, and when I got to the ticket counter, he said, what's your time is your reservation? And I said, I don't have a reservation. He says, well, how many of you are there? I'm just one. The guy in front of me had just turned in a ticket he didn't need. So I got to go in, went through the whole experience. I'm sure many of you have been there. But amongst other things was the basement. And I went down to the basement, and there was a letter from the State Department that said, use every form of red tape you can to keep the Jews from coming to America. And it was like, oh my God. And then there was a letter from the Swedish embassy, and they said the Americans are worthless. They won't help anybody. The only people here that are any good are the Unitarians. And it was on display at the Holocaust Museum. So I'm kind of proud of that. And that's where our Unitarian Universalist Association, the International Service, helped me, remind me the name of that organization. Thank you, UUSC. Anyway, that's where they came from, was working with the refugees from World War II. I'll quit there.
Thanks, Roger. So you can hand that microphone to Tim, because he's gonna,
Talk next.
yeah.
I don't have to go just yet.
Still on?
Tim, do you want somebody out there with you? Sarah?
Doesn't matter, I can babble by myself.
He's gonna babble by himself. And we'll take a break after Tim.
Well, I don't have any long stories, but I have a lot of memories.
You can take your mask off if you want to.
Okay. First memory I have of the Unitarian Church was when I was a freshman at Wesleyan back in '65, I think it was. Somebody said, you ought to go to the Unitarian Church. Wow, that's really great. So I checked it out, and it was in the summer. There was somebody there in bare feet. They didn't take a collection plate, and I thought, I think I could get used to this. And
Might have been Roger in bare feet.
might have been. Then at that time, there was quite a bit different membership process. There was a table up here, still there, and they had a membership book, and all you did is sign it, and then nobody ever said anything to you after that. And so one time I signed it, and then I went back years later and was looking at it, and I couldn't find my name, so I joined again. I was living up here after I had moved back from Grand Island, and I was living up 33rd and Y, and I ran into somebody in the same house named Harry Hafer, and we ended up going to the church at the same time, and that was before Karen. So some of the other memories I have is we used to have the Unitarian Singles where we'd get together and do dating and stuff. That's where I met one of my wives. And some of the other memories were the camp that we used to have. We had it in 3 different locations and made some great friends and had some great stories. I remember a few from Judy Cole, but I can't really repeat them. I actually learned how to rappel at one of the camps, if you can believe that. I remember at one of the camps, Russ Alberts had brought his telescope along, like about a 20-foot telescope on a big trailer. I couldn't believe it. Duncan Case had come from, I think, Michigan, had started a men's group there, started one here after our men's potluck. We were discussing some men's group book at the time, I think, Fire in the Belly or something. And we're still going 30 years later now. Meet every month or every 2 weeks. Lots of good friends from that group that I've met and still know. There's been a lot of good music over the years that I've enjoyed and been a part of some of the music recently before we got shut down in the choir. Enjoyed working with the grounds and the garden out in front here. Since Christmas is coming up, I remember some of the Christmas Eve midnight candlelight services with Harvey Henshaw playing the harpsichord up here. They were great memories. And then ever since I came back from Vietnam, I've been kind of a full-time, can't think of the word right now, protester, although I've slowed down a lot in the last few years. And so the Women's March, that was one of the biggest ones I've been part of. But a lot of Unitarians are in almost every one of the groups protesting the war, women's rights, civil rights, human rights, environmental rights, and stuff like that. So what else have I got here? Oh, at our previous church, I was in the back doing something and distracted, and somebody said, somebody's asking you to come up in front. So, and it almost missed my unsung Unitarian thing. And that's about it. So I've had a lot of, and I think one of the biggest changes I've had over the years is, if anybody knows me, they know I'm pretty tight and conservative financially. And over the years, I've changed quite a bit so that now I give pretty freely to the church and feel like it's a good, worthy endeavor to do that because you want it to stick around. So.
Were you on the Interfaith Housing Board at one time?
Not on the board, no, but I helped with some of the cleanups. Yeah.
Do you have any memories of that?
Just doing some painting and cleaning up and different.
President ambassador of
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Orvis was helping a lot on that. Who's next?
I think we're gonna take a break. Thank you, everybody who shared their story. There'll be more, but how long, Kathy? What do you think, 10 minutes? 10 minutes. And if you haven't signed up for a story and you want to share a story, please, I think our next hour has plenty of space in it.
Yeah,
so.
like 10 minutes for a story.
Yeah.
If you haven't signed in, please do so. If you have questions about what's out on the wall.
Yeah, take some time
Mine wasn't that quick, it was 24 hours. And it was really, and my friend, and CBS, my dad to see my ceremony, which was very, very helpful.
That's a great idea.
I was thinking of putting together a room type thing that would go slowly through it. I would kind of read it before.
Well, we can add like a little chair. No, I just can ask, Lori. I think Karen, do you want to say, do you want to talk about your early time? So, hey, Harry, we're gonna start again. Is Chelsea Joellen, would you go first? Sure. I'll go cover. Okay. And I'm gonna watch the clock, because we have 4 people that are gonna share.
That mic is up there.
Oh, there you go, there's a mic up there.
Has it been disconnected?
You'll try it and he'll tell you. And again, I know we're throwing things out, but if you just say your name before you start. So is it still running, Harry? Okay. So we're gonna start again, everybody.
I'm Joellen Polzine, and we were married in this church in 1970, and our first anniversary we joined as members. And at that time, there was Couples Club, and Couples Club went on for years until everybody got divorced. And then they changed the name to 6300 Club. And I was in Moms, and we started the Moms and Pops. But the Moms and Pops was just for social events. So the moms met, and then we had started having a lot of social events, which included the dads. So we called those the Moms and Pops groups, and we'd have a dinner and gather at different people's, everybody's houses, rotated around.
And it was a lot of fun. We did a lot of fun things together. And Marshall, Nancy Marshall's husband, was a chef somewhere in Lincoln, I think at the university. And he used to get a hold of all these big, huge official pans and heaters and all this stuff. And he fixed this elaborate New Year's Eve dinner that we had every year that was just amazing. And we met every month, and a different group cooked. So we would sign up for a month, and we met most of the year. You remember how many times, Karen? Yeah, I don't remember if we met in the summer or not, but, you know. Yeah, but I mean, it was every month, and we would sign up. We had to sign up ahead, and then there was a committee. You signed up for what month you wanted, and everybody came, and you spent all day cooking. And then I think they were on Friday nights for some reason. And then that night, we would collect the money from everybody. And of course, we served alcohol. We served wine with dinner. And we just had a fantastic time. And there were just lots and lots of things. So Dwayne and I were invited to attend that before we ever got married. So we went to the couples club dinner before we got married here. And everybody was incredibly friendly and was a lot of fun. But my neighbor, who became a realtor, told me the gossip, and the gossip was that at that group, at the end of the night, every time they met, the women all threw in, or the men, one of them, all threw in their house keys, and then someone would pull them out, and they'd go home together. This was total fiction. And how in the world this got going. But people around town believed it. So anyway, in some man's fantasy, obviously. And the moms group, that was really great. And I remember that I brought Darcy when she was a week old. And she was so tiny. Both the girls were small, but Darcy was 5 pounds, 12 ounces, and she didn't weigh much more than that a week later. And I took her, and Linda Brown was sitting next to me with Evan. And of course, Linda and her husband were both so tall. They're tall, tall people, and their kids were tall, tall people. And I thought he was just 9 months old. She said since then, no, he was older than that. But he was still nursing, and he's there, and Darcy's next to him, and it's like, I have a doll. And she's got this child that's huge, so I'll never forget that. And we did do the clothing exchange, which was a terrific help. We were going to take Darcy camping in the summertime, but up in the mountains, and so it was from the moms group that we got all the winter clothes to wrap her up in, because we didn't have any, because she was 5 months old. So, and cute clothes of her in those clothes and the camping, and lots of good memories. The junior high or senior high kids, I don't know, I maybe someone knows who was here, used to build this huge haunted house. And I don't know if they opened it up to the public and charged or not, but it was very elaborate, and it was fabulous. And they had that, and I remember the kids going through that, so they were a little older. So they were born in the 70s, so whoever was in junior, senior high in the 70s, the church would be able to tell you that. But it was quite amazing. So, what else? There were so many things, really. We did start having summer camps, as someone has mentioned. And Judy Cole was behind the first one. And it was very elaborate. And towards the end, she asked me to assist her. Julie Anderson, I think, was the one who had been assisting her. And then she couldn't, and so I helped Judy at the end. But Judy had this huge notebook, all organized, and she'd done all this as the protocol of what you could do. And she was so upset because the next person claims they never got it, and it disappeared. So I think Judy, to her dying day, was ticked off about that. So anyway, they were fabulous retreats, and they were all church retreats. And I remember one of them, my daughters, they were both fluent in French. So they were talking to each other in French. one of them had come and the other one refused to come. So they were on the telephone talking French, so nobody would know what they were saying because it was critically important and top secret. So, any questions about any of that time? 70s?
I think Karen's gonna talk a little bit more about that time.
Probably about the same stuff.
No, that's good, thanks, Joelle.
You're welcome.
So, Laura Lee or Karen or Chelsea, anybody wanna jump in? Go ahead, Karen. No, really, you'll piggyback on her.
There wasn't much more to say, actually, that I can remember.
You and I forgot all about UUWF, which I know.
Oh, I know it.
And she'll just introduce yourself when you start.
Karen Dean Spear. I will play off of Joe Ellen's talk there. Dick and I came here in 1969, so just before Joe Ellen. And we joined the church about 4 months after we were here because we really felt like this was the place we wanted to be. But having moved here as a new family, having no contacts except for my husband's connection with the psychology department at the university, which has brought us to Lincoln in the first place, there were 6 families in the psychology department at that point, all coming out here to church. And so we were invited to come along. But before we were invited to come to church, we too were invited to come to the couples club on Friday night, which really was fun, as Joellen has mentioned. But beyond the couples club, which lasted for a very long time, into the late 70s, or at least mid-70s, there was also the women's group that met, and there were several different women's groups throughout Unitarian Universalism, all connected through a national organization. And the name changed, or there were 2 different organizations to begin with, but there was always one here at our church. And Sheila Wall may remember the name of the organization, I'm not sure. But Margaret Seymour and Sheila and a number of other UU women would come to the monthly meetings, and then we would put on, we would help with wedding receptions, memorial services, or other special events that were needed. And we also contributed money to different aspects of whatever was going on. So a lot of the dishes and silverware and things like that that are used from time to time here still today came from that women's group. And they supported in many different ways throughout Unitarian churches what was going on within the church and when possible. As I recall, there must have been some kind of dues, but I can't remember that as well. So beyond that, I think that really kind of wraps into the discussion groups too. So from there, we had women's discussion groups later in the 90s, maybe, that were connected with those early women's groups that were also social but working within the church. And today here, the remnants of that beginning group still comes together to offer their help at receptions. So memorial services, weddings and so on.
Chelsea, if you'll introduce yourself when you begin this story.
Hi, I'm Chelsea Krafka. I'm the Director of Religious Education, and when the committee reached out to me, I said, no, you can hear from other people. That's just fine. You hear plenty from me because I do stories on Sunday mornings and so forth. So, but maybe it's worthwhile to tell a couple stories that can fit me in at the end here. I don't know how many like once upon a time kind of stories I have, but I can tell you a little bit about my story. And coming here, I think it was 1991 when my mom became the director of religious education, and I was 8 years old at the time, and came with my little brother who was 5. My mom had gotten the job here because she had just been working inside the home, but when she and my father divorced, she wanted to get a job on her own, and so she came to work here. And it was an interesting situation after the divorce, and my mom was trying to figure out work and what was going on with our lives, and Alan and Lois Hansen invited us to live at their house. So we stayed living in their basement for 4 months while my mom figured out our housing situation and such. And so we became really close with the Hansen family because of that. And it doesn't get any more welcoming than you can come live in my home. And so we're always forever grateful to those church members. As a young person, I most remember the zip line. I'm sure maybe Bailey talked about that, perhaps. Will talked about the zip line, the dangerous. That was a lot of fun going down to Lynn's Garden. And I spent a lot of time here. I think it was kind of a safe haven for my mom after the divorce to have this place. And so my brother and I just kind of ran wild at the church while she was working. And being the daughter of a director of religious education, I was constantly also like the first person to arrive and the last person to leave. So we would have an empty church to ourselves quite frequently. I remember being dragged to board meetings, and as an adult, I will say I'm very grateful for the board. I think they're interesting now as an adult, but as an 8-year-old, I would call them board meetings, B-O-R-E-D, board. Because I would have to just sit and keep myself entertained in my mom's office or in the preschool room while she was working. I remember the soup supper and bringing out the giant pillows out by the fireplace. As a teenager, I was really highly involved in the youth group, and we would have what was called LinCon, so Lincoln Conference, that we hosted. I remember we had so many teenagers. One year we had to turn people away. And there were, 120, 130, something like that. And this was before we had a shower in the building. So we had to go down to the YMCA maybe to have showers. And it was a lot of teens. That was a really good experience as a youth for me to do and to have that leadership. I remember I was one of the co-deans, so one of the 2 people leading the whole thing as a, junior, senior in high school. I was offered a role in the school play in Little Women. I was offered the role of Marmee, and I turned it down because I was leading the youth conference here at church, and I didn't want to miss that. It was more important to me. And at the conferences, they were typically, a Friday through Sunday morning. And one of the most important and meaningful things that we did during the youth conference were our worship services, and that was something that I helped lead. You could start seeing my life path before I even did, really. But we would gather in here and meet in a giant circle and be really intense as these high schoolers and turn the lights down low and have candlelight and just bare our souls and be, in tears, these hormonal teenagers. Just really, it was a group of like-minded kids, and it was really meaningful. And one of the things that I remember about our youth conferences was something that we called unrequited love. Is this familiar to anybody? Does that sound, I mean, you know the concept, but okay, so the activity was in the dark. There would be one group over here and one group over there. And because we still believed in consent, you could cross your arms if you didn't want to participate. If you did want to participate, you'd leave your arms at your side, and one group would stay with their eyes closed, and the other group would come over to you and hug you. And like now, even with consent, that seems kind of weird. Like, don't touch. But at the time, it was really powerful. And for youth, I think that were struggling or going through a hard time, or even those of us who are really quite well pulled together, just to have others show that they loved and cared about you was really meaningful. And then you'd switch. So then you'd go to the other group. So that was one of the worship experiences that I remember. However, there were some not so, appropriate things that also happened at the conferences. Now, I was a perfect angel because I was the director of religious education's daughter, Harry coughs. I was a perfect angel at these conferences where I was also in charge, and it would be a reflection on my mother. When we went out of town and it was other conferences, maybe not so much. But there was some smoking of marijuana in the parking lot and confiscation of said marijuana, and then like a whole thing about talking to the kids about, you know, our covenant and all of that. There was also some sex that happened in the preschool room up in the, here's another memory. We had this giant preschool. It was like this wooden, I don't know, does anybody remember who built that? Philo Prell. So it was a really cool house situation with a loft up high. And there was definitely, I was trying to sleep down at bottom, and it was like, no, there's definitely something going on up there. It was no good. And that is part of why we don't have these overnight conferences anymore, is because I remember what happened, and now I'm the person who is responsible for all of this. Although I am fully open to conferences that are not the overnight portion. Like all day, totally good. Like all day Saturday, fine. It's like past 10 p.m. when the stuff goes down. So also as a teenager, I did childcare. I was the preschool teacher for a number of years. Everyone knew they could call on me. Deb Stephen, who was the administrative director at the time, would call me up and say, come on in, we need you to do childcare. And then I kind of disappeared during college because I was here a lot. I was here all the time between the stuff that I was doing as a youth and then being with my mom, and I just kind of needed a break. Although every now and then I would come back for childcare or a Christmas Eve service or something. And then Bruce Raymer was the one to let me know that this job had opened. I was working part-time as the DRE 20 hours a week at Second Unitarian in Omaha in college. And it was really hard to do the commute. I really loved it, but it was also a very strange, within the year and a half I was there were 3 ministers at Second Unitarian in Omaha. So it was a really unsteady situation, and they couldn't pay very much. And then I heard that the job was open here through Bruce. I was folding towels at the YMCA at the front desk, in addition to going to school, in addition to working at the Children's Museum, in addition to working at Blockbuster and working part-time at the church in Omaha. And Bruce said, maybe you could work just 40 hours and have health benefits and come to the church in Lincoln. I said, okay. And I'm very grateful that I was offered the position, and I came, it was before the church renovation, so I sat in the same office. I don't know if it's the same desk or not, but certainly in the same office that my mother did. And I saw her handwriting in several places as I started going through files and looking at things in the bookshelf. So my mother's handwriting was still around. which was really lovely to see. And I guess just to wrap it up, some of the things that I started, that I brought to the church here, there used to be, in the gathering place, we would have, I don't even remember what it was called, Children's Chapel, essentially, in the gathering place before. And I took that model and we started doing regular in-gatherings, was what I decided to call them. And it was typically when we wouldn't have as many volunteers. So it was when I would teach, and it would be around the holidays more often than not. So I would teach the children during that time and get to know them and do special crafts and activities and stories during holidays when LPS was out. Also our UNICEF pumpkin decorating. So we have had now, I think I started at the first or second year that I was here, where around Halloween, during one of the in-gatherings, we'll have the children decorate the pumpkins, and then we put them up for a at-will donation to UNICEF. Trick or Treat for UNICEF had been around for many years, but doing it this way was something that I started. The canned food hunt. I wanted a different, I heard from parents, we don't want candy. We don't want more plastic eggs. Don't give our kids more plastic, more random toys. We don't want that. So instead of doing an Easter egg hunt for a couple years, I led the youth group on Wednesday evenings before we had a paid youth leader. And when in chatting with them about this, they decided, well, maybe we can do something good for other people. And so we decided to start hiding cans of food out on the grounds, which is tricky in April when the grass is kind of wet. But all in all, it's kind of fun for the children to go hunt for cans of food. And there was one year in particular that there was just so many cans of food that we were able to donate to the Eastridge Food Pantry, which was really lovely. So alternative Easter egg hunts, I think, is something that I've brought. Because we've changed it up over the years. We also did pennies, and then the children got to choose which place they donated the pennies to. We changed the name. It used to be Secret Friends, but we realized that keeping secrets with children is not the best idea. This is our matching adults and children together program to write for about 5-6 weeks and exchange letters. So we changed it to UU Pen Pals. And just this last year in the pandemic, I started doing Sunday school in a bag because we realized even though I'm offering many, many other ways to connect, we're doing Sunday school online. I'm sending out lesson plans through emails to parents. It's just, I realized I have to do many different ways of trying to reach families right now. And so I started doing activities to deliver to people's doors, literally. And so in a bag or in a manila envelope, literally handing people Sunday school plans and activities to do at home. And what else we did, like the stuffed animal sleepover last year, and this year some different wooden ornaments that correlate with UU principles. So we've just had to really think outside the box during the pandemic. So anyway, I've talked for long enough, so thank you so much.
There?
Yeah, my mom started coming here and Laura Lee Woodruff. My mom started coming to this church in about the mid-'80s. She had met Lois Hanson when they were forming a PFLAG group that originally met in people's homes, and then as it grew bigger, Mom suggested this church, and Lois was on the board at the time, so that started PFLAG meeting in this church and eventually led to this congregation becoming Welcoming Congregation. So I started coming to church with my kids every now and then, and Charles would have been the minister, when we would come down to visit. So I was a little bit familiar, and I knew, I actually had a friend in Minnesota who had been a member here before there. She was my first supervisor when I had a little private practice when I first finished graduate school. That was Ann Garricky. I don't know if any of you might know her. She was a good friend of Lois Hanson's, though. And I also met Lois and Alan and some other people with Mom at General Assembly in '93, because by then I had joined it was a Universalist church in Minneapolis. And so then another time, after the '93 General Assembly, there was a lot of women's activities I'd gone to, and there was a new curriculum the Unitarian Universalist Women's Federation was putting out called Rise Up and Call Her Name. So I became one of the first, the first training they had for trainers of that curriculum. I went to that in Wisconsin, and then the first training for trainers that we held at our church in Minneapolis. Joe Ellen came up, and Joanna Fink came up, and I don't know if there were others. Do you remember from your church? Lois Hanson came up too at that time, yeah. And I know there was another women's conference that several of you came up to at that church. So it was really interesting. And plus at the church I started at up there in Minneapolis, the religious education director was Ginger Luke, who you all had here before Beryl. Yeah, so just a lot of connections in different ways coming to this church. And you all know how active my mom was here and with the social justice kinds of things, and served a long time on the social justice committee. And I did some early things about racial justice with the Allies for Racial Equity. Didn't get that going off the ground very well, and also a program called Journey Towards Wholeness from again, the denomination. These were denomination programs. So I'm really glad that there's a whole lot more going about racial justice issues now. I'm not a really good leader to get momentum out of people and get people volunteering, so I'm glad we have people like Judy and Karen at this church, and Shadat and Becky with the Social Justice Committee. What else?
Can you say your mom's name in the microphone?
Jean Eileen Durgan Clinchard. Yep. And she's been dead for about 2.5 years now. The other thing that was a connection is right after Fritz was called, and I had started with an interim minister and another person on our board. We had started a worship associates based on the Oakland, California model. And Mom thought that was so interesting, and I should tell the new minister. So one time when I was down, I met with Fritz and gave him all our training materials, and he gave me training materials he had for something called Pastoral Associates. So we kind of exchanged a lot of information about those kinds of things before I'd even knew I was going to move down here. I moved here after my older brother had died, because Mom was not doing very well for a while, and ended up staying here. So, yeah.
So I think we can take a break for a little while. We have 3 more people that I know want to speak, and it's Karen and Bailey, but Bailey won't be here until 6, and also Mary Ann Meisner and Harry. So, and that's 4 people. That's 4 people. That's more than what I said. We could go ahead and have Harry
Hi, Harry Hafer. Great to see folks here tonight. I lost the bet with Karen. I thought we'd be lucky to have 10, so it's fantastic to see the folks that are here. Like Roger and Denise, I wasn't born and raised as a Unitarian in Lincoln, but I was in Boulder, Colorado. And so after college graduation from Fort Collins, Colorado State, got a job here with Nebraska Game and Parks. And my dad at the time said, boy, you're moving to an awful conservative state. And I said, well, yeah, well, job, whatever. And it sounded fun and exciting. Well, one of the first things, some of you have heard this probably, I did was look in the phone book. Remember what those are? Right? Okay. Everyone here knows what those are still, at least. Another generation, they won't. But anyway, I looked in the yellow pages, and sure enough, Unitarian Church, yay! I felt saved almost, knowing that I'd find some liked minds. And, of course, anything from Boulder, Colorado would be conservative anyway, and most of the rest of Colorado was at that time, too. But, so I started coming, and some of the first people I remember meeting, Amy Berkey, Alan Lois Hansen's been mentioned several times. In fact, they hosted our family in their house also for 2 or 3 months as our house was getting built, so finishing its construction. Ernst and Barbara Kuhn, the Kimberleys, of course, many others that are unfortunately no longer with us, and Charles and Pat, of course. And by an interesting fluke, Tim Johnson mentioned this as well, that we happened to be living in the same house that had been converted into apartments. He was in the basement and I was on the first floor. And, we saw each other at church one day, and then he was going into the basement, and I go, hey, didn't I just see you at church? So it was an interesting connection that way. So Tim almost is probably the one I've known the longest from the church in that sense here. And it was an interesting connection that way. One of the first things I remember helping out with here was when I first started in '79, and obviously years before that, you could park on A Street. There was no center turn lane. And within a couple years after that, the city changed it to a center turn lane, and we couldn't use our main front entrance, which is where the fireplace is now. The park, you could still come in that way. And some insisted on still parking elsewhere, walking down the sidewalk and coming in that door. I remember there was a couple of people that always did that. But so there was no really lights along the sidewalk that was kind of the main entrance now from the parking lot to the office wing, which used to shoot off to the north. Right about where the memorial tree is where that hallway was that went to the north. The entrance doors were there. And so I helped Pat Stephen actually dig some holes and install these black post little lights for the sidewalk that would go on out to the parking lot. So, and ever since then, I think it feels like I've been on building committee ever since. And of course, our son mentioned it as well, and I might get in trouble if I didn't. One of the highlights of being in this church was meeting my wife and convincing her to become Unitarian, meeting Karen and becoming my wife here in this church and raising our kids in this church. So it's been a wonderful, 40 years for Karen and I, and of course since 1979 for having moved here and joined right after I moved to Lincoln. So thank you.
What do you think, Kathy? Should we take just a little break? Yeah, why don't we take a little break, and then we'll come back at 6, and we'll finish up the rest of the stories. Please take a look at all of the exhibit in the lobby. It's going to be up through the end of January, too. Yeah, the other one's, it's just getting focused. Yeah. That's why I came, because they used to read more, like, I guess it was Prince's time, more plays during, more theatrical literature during the service. So I we did that a lot. Yeah, well, I came on a Sunday when, King Harrison? No, well before that, actually. What's his name who was, a poet from
like so? Wonderful. Well, I'm going to talk about,
Who are you?
oh, I am Mary Ann Meisner. I'm going to talk about the retreats that were started by women from our church for women in Prairie Star District that went on for sure for 8 years. Our church was the first one that started the model, and that was in 1986. Now, I need to preface this by saying I do not have notes from that retreat. I don't recall exactly who all was among the planners. I think I was one of them, as was Lois Hanson and Ginger Luke and Linda Brown and B.J. Wheeler. But that's all from memory. And that was 35 years ago. So be gentle. 100 attended that first retreat we did. And as I recall it, we did it at a camp that was outside of Fremont. And it was like a Friday evening, Saturday through Sunday noonish. Different churches in different states took the next round. Now, I need to explain too, Prairie Star District initially was comprised of North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, Kansas, Minnesota, Iowa, and western Wisconsin. So we went different places. Each group planned the program, what they highlighted. It was quite a tumultuous time in the late 80s and into the 90s for women's movements. We had people come like Starhawk to different groups. They were always interesting and a lot of fun. Oh, and T-shirt. This is our T-shirt from 35 years ago. And it's Prairie Star Women. And that's who we were. And that's what we did. Any questions?
What would happen at the retreats? What would you talk about?
Oh, well, it was all planned out. There were different educational lectures that we could go to. There were different experimental kinds of things, like guided imagery, meditation, movement, those kinds of esoteric things that you don't encounter in your everyday life. And it's not necessarily about the family. It's about you as a woman and your life and your experiences.
Did you pay your own way? Or
Yes, there was a fee. There was also, if people needed assistance, financial assistance, that was granted also. And they were always held at a campsite of some kind, you know, whether it was a church camp or YWCA or 4-H, whatever. But in different states. One time, we were at a college campus in Iowa, in eastern Iowa, northeastern Iowa. But it was always interesting. There were always food involved, of course, you know. Gotta have food. Sometimes firelit things at night, witchy things, drumming circles.
art project?
Yes. It was just a chance to be with other women, to communicate, to listen, to learn, to be quiet, and listen to your own heart.
Thank you, Mary.
Any questions? That's it.
And I think Karen and Bailey are gonna wrap it up for us. Does your memory card get full?
Yep, I've used that two already.
Well, we've got the other recording is going.
Yeah, it's still recording on.
Oh, darn, I thought I was having a recording.
Mary Ann, you made me, where'd she go? Oh, you made me start jotting down memories from just your time.
I will start, or do you wanna go first? Is this going on? No, it's off.
Yeah, I turned it on. Oh,
Okay.
okay. Oh, mask.
Oh, this.
So weird.
Yeah, feels naked. I'm Karen Hafer, and there is so many memories for this church because for a while there it seemed like it was, we would call it our second home. But I thought I brought a couple of things to point out though. One of them was I just couldn't resist in that the reason we were so, especially the women in this church, were so excited when we found out we'd be renovated, especially when the first thing when they said, "What do you want?" The very first thing I swear that was said was a new bathroom. Because if people did not know, in the old bathroom, first of all, if you had more than 2 people in there, you were taking your life in your own hands because the door would open, it would hit you. But other than that, they had one stall, and the other stall that was the handicap stall, it did not have a door, it had a curtain. And this is the curtain that was there. And it was hung, and that's what was the only curtain, the door for the handicapped stall in the women's bathroom. So, anyway, it's very festive, but still. And so there's a lot of memories, especially teaching Sunday school and having our kids in Sunday school when I know Will talked, but he was called the wild child by Beryl a number of times. But anyway, and then got involved with a lot of different things. But the one thing I guess I'd like to talk about is the thing that I get the most, a lot of times, energized of right now is doing the auction. And to talk about how it used to be, when we first started going to the auction, we were a young couple just starting out, so we didn't have a whole lot of money. So we'd sit there, and there would always be a auctioneer, and you would get a packet like this, and it would list everything that people did, and then you obviously would bid. Well, I'm not bad-mouthing, but again, we were young, did not have money, and we were in a room full of professors that had made some money. And so we very, very, very rarely those first years ever got anything because we couldn't afford it. It made great money for the church, but we could never afford it. So they had live auctioneers for a number of years. And then, and also the difference too was that instead of like today we call it the tasty treat table, but back then it was called the gourmet table. And so needless to say, being a new person, I didn't feel like I could put my good old whatever, raspberry bars or whatever it was, because they weren't real gourmet. So that's why when Barbara Pearson agreed to help me out, and together we took on the auction, the first thing was we've got to do something so that it was available for more people to be able to bid. And so it went from, we did have a live auctioneer at one year, and then we decided, gosh, we're spending over $200 to pay somebody to come. That's ridiculous, because there's some other way we can do this thing. And then luckily we got the idea from Fritz, who had got it from another church, about doing posters. And you put everything on a poster,
and have people bid on the poster, and then that's how you did the bidding. So that's how we came upon getting the posters all up on the gallery space for a number of years. And then one year we did have we tried live with the other way too, but we decided that just did not work. We didn't like that, and we actually didn't make that much money. But anyway, and so then the big thing obviously is still in this church, the meals. And thank goodness for Kathy Disney and her mom, who were willing. They gave us donated plates, an old set of china that she had. And so that's how we could set the table and make that as the meal thing to have the meal bidding. And then we added the baskets, and people were able to do those. And again, we did the tasty treats, so we still have those. But it's evolved a lot through the years, and I still hope that we can go back to having a great event and a gathering prior to the kickoff. I really missed that this year, even though the online thing worked great, but I really missed that, because that was really fun, getting people together and starting the bidding and trying to hold people back. No, you can't bid on that yet until, but anyway, I think that the auction still is one of my most fun things here in this church, even though there's a ton of stuff through the years that have been great memories. Besides getting married here and renewing our vows in Lynn Garden, and so
I was gonna bring those up, Mom.
it's a very special place. So
your memories of Lynn Garden, the students called it Secret Garden. Who is this talking? Oh, sorry, this is Bailey, and I'm this woman's daughter, and daughter of Harry. And my married name is Fight, Bailey Fight, but obviously it was Bailey Hafer. And I have been in this church my entire life. Just like my mom said, I consider it a second home, because I can walk in and see all these faces that are here now, and you all know me, and that's just this warm feeling inside of me. So that's wonderful. But I just love the memories. I remember when my parents got their vows renewed in the garden. But I remember growing up, and that garden was the secret garden. Us kids would go down there and we'd play, and we thought we were out of the eye of the adults. And then here comes my dad's whistle. And that was the time where we knew it was time to load up and go home, right there. And then we'd be in the car, and we'd wait for another 10, 15 minutes, because Dad kept talking or trying to put tables back or fix things. Or I remember spending quite many evenings here helping vacuum. I remember vacuuming, coming with Dad, because he was like a part-time custodian at the time. I don't remember what all the details were, but I just remember having to come and help clean the church. That's something that really sticks with me to this day, is what the church taught me or instilled in me, and my parents instilled that into me, is that it was everybody. Everybody helps put the chairs away. Everybody helps put the tables up. Everybody helps put the tables away. Everyone helps clean the dishes. Everyone takes care of the kitchen. We take care of this place. So those are some really good memories. God, I kept writing some down when you kept going. So I need to repeat the zip line. Someone told me that others have talked about the zip line, but there is a great picture of me lifting my feet up with my hands and going down the zip line from up here all the way down to the Lynn Garden. That's some good memories. There's pictures of me in the trees, climbing the trees on the monkey bars. The monkey bars were my favorite place. Secret Friends. Secret Friends is still a huge part of my memories at this church. I still, to this day, Penny Larson and I get together twice a year, and she was my very first secret friend at the age of 4. And so for 30 years, we have stayed in touch, and that is because of this church and the relationships we built here. Soup supper. Soup supper was one of my favorite nights We had everybody here, the camaraderie, the kids were here. We did songs. We had the fireplace going when there was a fireplace out there. I remember that fireplace. I was so bummed when we were going to get rid of it, but it's a beautiful space now. But my mom and I would always do the 12 days of Christmas, and we'd have actions for all of the parts. And I don't think my mom wants to perform it right now, but every time I hear the 12 days of Christmas, I go through our little dancing routine that we would do with the kids. My favorite memory. Oh man, there's so many. Coming of age here in this church was a great experience and program. The fact that I got to have a mentor in Becky Seth still sticks with me to this day. I also remember interviewing Topher Hansen, and I don't remember what the assignment was. I just remember getting to spend a lot of time with him and learn about him. And again, we see each other often, and we talk still, and we reconnect. And I remember doing my coming of age speech up here, and it just made me feel like I had become an adult. It really was powerful. I remember going to Camp Kitaki in the summertime. I think they were Unitarian retreats at Camp Kitaki. I still remember those. We played games with these sheets, and you try to get the balloons up and over and catch them with a sheet, and it was all sorts of fun. I remember feeling really cool as a high schooler when we got the fishbowl area. It had all the glass surrounding it. Does anybody remember that classroom? Had glass all the way around it. We called it the fishbowl, and we felt pretty cool as high schoolers having that room. That's gone now, but that was a good memory. Owl was a wonderful program also that I still remember to this day. Feeling, again, like this is home. It doesn't matter who was in the room, who the adult was. You always really felt safe, and I think that's the power of having that program here. Weddings. So my mom mentioned her and dad getting married here and renewing their vows, but then also I had my wedding reception here, so did my brother, so it's really stayed in our family, and it's a very important piece. Two more things. One is music. Music has always brought me back to this place, singing in choir, having the opportunity to play my French horn, have a lot of great memories with Bill being the accompanist. He's also a big part of growing up. Every time I'd see Bill, it was always a big hug and a kiss on the forehead. And I still remember that. Gives me a smile. I just want to end with, growing up, I never really fit in at any of my schools growing up in my Monday through Friday classrooms, K-12 education. I felt good at Lincoln High, but it was always the Unitarian Church, which is where I felt like I could be me, and I fit in no matter what, whether I was having a bad day or I looked different or acted different. There's just a lot of love in this church and acceptance in this church that, just makes it unique in Lincoln, and I love it here. So thanks for inviting me to share my memories today.